The flicker of the phone screen in Scott's hand showed Sarah's face, her profile picture mocking me from Tinder. "Life is one big adventure," the caption read, followed by, "My husband doesn't know about this." My blood ran cold, the familiar kitchen suddenly a foreign place. Scott just stared, his eyes confirming the gut punch. "You okay, man?" he finally asked, his voice flat. David stares at his phone, hands trembling, seeing Sarah's Tinder profile. The "Life is one big adventure" caption and "My husband doesn't know about this" hit him like a physical blow. He recalls Sarah curled next to him just nights ago, her green eyes smiling. Scott's voice crackles over the speaker, asking if David's okay, confirming the devastating discovery. David takes a desperate swig of bourbon, memories of their life together flashing before him. He demands Scott send all screenshots, his voice unnervingly calm, military training kicking in. Sarah's bio, married but bored, looking for excitement without complications, makes the room spin. He remembers her outrage over a cousin's cheating husband, her declarations of commitment. David questions Scott about when he found the profile, the raw disbelief heavy in his chest. The tactical mind takes over. "I need you to do something for me. Create a fake profile." He explains he wants proof, to know how far she's willing to go, to make her face what she's done. Scott hesitates, asking if David really wants to catfish his own wife. David begins to analyze Sarah's desires. Someone with status, a professional, someone who travels. He pulls out his laptop, a cold dread setting in, checking shared cloud storage for hidden files. A password-protected folder labeled personal confirms his growing suspicions. David's hands started to tremble, the phone Scott held feeling heavy even from across the small, scarred kitchen table. Sarah's face, a carefully chosen photo from their trip to the Outer Banks last summer, smiled back from the Tinder profile. Her green eyes, usually so warm, now seemed to mock him, framed by the words, "Life is one big adventure." Beneath that, the real blow landed. "My husband doesn't know about this." The sentence hit him harder than any fist, a physical impact that stole the air from his lungs. He could feel the blood drain from his face, leaving a cold, hollow space behind his ribs. Just 3 nights ago, Sarah had been curled beside him on the sofa, her head resting on his chest, watching some documentary about wildlife. She had laughed softly, her hand tracing patterns on his arm, her eyes shining with that familiar light. He remembered the smell of her shampoo, the warmth of her breath against his neck. Now that memory twisted, curdling into something foul. Scott's voice, rough with concern, crackled through the quiet kitchen. "David, are you even hearing me? You okay, man?" Scott sat opposite, still holding his phone out, the screen a cruel beacon. David didn't answer right away. He reached for the half-empty bottle of bourbon on the table, the one they'd opened for some forgotten celebration. He poured a generous slug into his glass, the amber liquid glinting under the fluorescent light. He swallowed it in a single gulp, the burn a welcome distraction from the freezing numbness in his gut. Their 10 years together flashed through his mind. The early days, the shared dreams, the small house they'd bought with their combined savings, the careful plans for a future that now seemed to shatter into a million pieces. He cleared his throat, the sound a low rasp. "Send me all of it," he demanded, his voice unnervingly calm, flat, almost devoid of emotion. It was the same tone he used to use in the field, relaying orders under pressure, a practiced detachment. Every screenshot, her bio, everything on that profile. Scott nodded slowly, his brows furrowed. He tapped at his phone. A minute later, David felt his own phone vibrate in his pocket. He pulled it out, the screen lighting up with the damning images. Sarah's full bio now stared back at him. Married but bored, looking for excitement without complications. The words spun in his vision. The room tilted. He gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. He remembered her fury just last year, when her cousin's husband had been caught cheating. Sarah had ranted for hours about betrayal, about trust, about the sanctity of marriage. "Some people just have no moral compass," she declared, her green eyes flashing with indignation. "If you make a commitment, you honor it. Simple as that." The memory felt like another fresh cut. "When?" David asked. The word clipped. When did you find this? Scott shifted in his seat. Last night I was just, scrolling. Never thought I'd see her on there. Took me a minute to process it was actually her. David didn't respond to the explanation. His mind was already moving, processing, strategizing. The military training, dormant for years, resurfaced, pushing back the immediate pain, replacing it with a cold, clear focus. I need you to do something for me, he said, looking up at Scott. Create a fake profile. Someone new, no connection to me or anyone we know. Scott blinked. He said, you want me to catfish your wife? I want proof, David corrected, his voice flat. I need to know how far she's willing to go, how real this is, and then I'll make her face it, every last bit of it. He leaned forward, his gaze fixed on some point beyond Scott's shoulder. Think about what she'd be looking for. Someone with status, probably. A professional, someone who travels a bit, maybe. Something she thinks she's missing. He pushed his chair back, the scrape loud in the quiet kitchen, and walked to the small desk in the corner. He pulled out his old laptop, the cold dread starting to settle in deeper now. He opened the web browser, navigated to their shared cloud storage. They had a joint account for photos, documents. He typed in his password. Then slowly he typed in hers. A new folder labeled personal, password protected, lay hidden among their shared files. His suspicions, until now nebulous and sickening, began to solidify into a hard, cold knot. David and Scott refined Paul Henderson, a 38-year-old corporate lawyer from out of town. Make him successful but not flashy, David instructs, picturing Sarah's type. Scott creates Paul's convincing profile, carefully crafting the illusion of a discreet fling. Sarah texts David, claiming she's staying at Brenda's for a girls' wine night. Another lie. David lies awake in their bed, tainted memories of painting their ceiling together haunting him. He starts his meticulous investigation, checking bank statements for unexplained withdrawals. Credit card bills show charges at unfamiliar stores and restaurants on work late nights. Her call history reveals repeated calls to an unknown number during her lunch breaks. By dawn, David has a timeline of calculated, sustained betrayal stretching back months. He realizes this wasn't a whim, but a deliberate pattern, a stranger sharing his life. Flashbacks to their early relationship, her vibrant laughter, the letters she wrote during his deployment. He remembers their shared dreams, building a stable life, plans for a family next year. David wonders when their solid life became boring for her, hardening his resolve. Scott texts, she took the bait, started chatting with Paul this morning. David, doing his security rounds at work, feels the irony of his own breached security. The glow of the laptop screen cast a blue light across David's face. Scott sat beside him, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Paul Henderson, David mused, testing the name. 38. Corporate lawyer. Works for some big firm, but he's based in Chicago, just visiting town on business. He leaned closer to the screen. Make him successful, but not flashy. Someone with quiet confidence, a good suit, maybe a classic car in the background of one of his photos. If you can find one that looks natural. No Rolex shots, no private jets. Sarah wouldn't fall for that. She likes the idea of discretion, of something sophisticated and slightly dangerous, but still respectable. Scott nodded, already searching for stock photos, carefully crafting Paul's online persona. The bio began to take shape, seeking stimulating conversation and shared experiences with someone who appreciates the finer things, without the complications of a permanent attachment. It was a tailor-made illusion, designed to attract someone seeking exactly what Sarah had written in her own profile. Scott uploaded the chosen photos. A man with intelligent eyes, a subtle smile, a tasteful business suit in one, a relaxed casual look in another, hinting at a life of leisure alongside his demanding career. Just as Scott was finalizing the details, David's phone buzzed. It was Sarah. A text message. Hey, love. Staying at Brenda's tonight. Girls' wine night, you know how it gets. Don't wait up. David stared at the words, the casual affection, a fresh stab. He pictured Brenda's living room, the familiar group of women, bottles of Chardonnay. Another lie. The ease with which she could conjure these fictions, The seamless way she wove them into their life made his stomach clench. He didn't reply. Later, in their bed, the sheets still carrying a faint scent of her perfume, David lay awake. The ceiling above them was the same shade of muted blue they'd painted together 3 years ago, laughing as paint splattered their faces. Now, the memory felt tainted, the blue sky above them a false canopy over a collapsing world. He got up, the silence of the house heavy around him, and moved to his study. He started his meticulous investigation. First, the joint bank statements. He scrolled through months of transactions. Nothing overtly suspicious, no huge withdrawals. But then he noticed a pattern of smaller, recurring cash withdrawals from ATMs in unfamiliar neighborhoods, always on evenings when Sarah claimed to be working late or at a networking event. Next, the credit card bills, charges for a boutique jewelry store he'd never heard of, a high-end restaurant on the edge of town, a florist that wasn't their usual spot. All on evenings that aligned with her alibis. Finally, her call history. He had access to the family plan. He scrolled, heart pounding, past familiar names. Brenda, her sister, her mom. Then an unknown number. Repeated calls, long durations, always during her lunch breaks, sometimes late in the evening. He cross-referenced the dates with his calendar, with her reported whereabouts. It wasn't a random acquaintance. This was sustained contact. By the time the first streaks of dawn painted the sky outside his window, David had a clear, chilling timeline. This wasn't a moment of weakness, a fleeting indiscretion. This was a calculated, sustained pattern of betrayal stretching back months, perhaps even longer. It wasn't a whim, it was a deliberate, almost methodical erosion of their shared life. He realized he had been living with a stranger, a version of Sarah he didn't know, one who was carefully compartmentalizing her life, keeping him in the dark. Flashbacks flickered, her vibrant laughter during their first picnic, the nervous excitement of their wedding day, the stack of letters she'd sent him during his deployment, filled with promises and longing. They talked about everything, built their dreams on solid ground. A stable life, plans for a family next year, maybe renovating the back porch. He had worked hard for them, for their future. He wondered when that solid life had become boring for her. The thought hardened something inside him, an already brittle resolve growing sharper, more focused. His phone vibrated again, breaking the quiet of the morning. A text from Scott. She took the bait, started chatting with Paul this morning. David stared at the message, a grim satisfaction battling with the raw hurt. Later that morning, doing his security rounds at work, checking locks, monitoring surveillance feeds, he felt the heavy irony. His job was to protect, to ensure the integrity of systems. Yet his own personal security had been so thoroughly, so deliberately breached. David demands Scott send him all conversations between Paul and Sarah, despite Scott's warning. He reads Sarah's flirtatious messages, her eagerness for excitement and discretion. She describes David as a good man, but a little, predictable, twisting the knife in his gut. Sarah reveals her fantasies of spontaneous passion, contrasting with their routine. David watches a video of Sarah, sent to Paul, of her dancing, revealing a side he hadn't seen in years. He uncovers a burner phone in her nightstand, confirming a deeper level of deception. The phone reveals text messages to an unknown man, Mike, coordinating secret meetings. David downloads a GPS tracking app onto Sarah's phone, preparing for surveillance. He decides he needs to see her with another man, to make the betrayal undeniably real. David starts following her, watching her meet Mike at a coffee shop during her lunch break. He photographs them, capturing their hand-holding and intimate gestures, the proof solidifying. Sarah plans a work conference for the following week, a likely cover for a rendezvous. David confirms through her work calendar that no such conference exists, another calculated lie. Scott suggests a specific hotel bar for Paul and Sarah's first meeting, a place David can observe. David sets up hidden cameras in their home, a painful but necessary step for documentation. "Send me everything," David told Scott over the phone, his voice tight. "Every conversation. Don't censor a thing." Scott's voice came back, hesitant. "Man, are you sure? This is going to hurt. You don't have to read it all." "I need to," David replied, the words flat. I need to know everything. Minutes later, the first screenshots started appearing on his phone. David scrolled, his breath catching in his throat. Sarah's messages, vibrant and flirtatious, jumped off the screen. "You sound like someone who knows how to have fun," she'd written to Paul. "I'm looking for excitement. Something a little daring but with discretion, of course." He read her description of him. "He's a good man, steady, reliable, but a little predictable, you know?" The words twisted in his gut, a slow, deliberate turning of the knife. Predictable. 10 years of building a life, of steady commitment, reduced to a single dismissive adjective. She talked about her fantasies of spontaneous passion, a sharp contrast to their quiet routines, the evenings spent on the sofa, the familiar rhythm of their lives. Then a video file. David clicked it. It was Sarah, in a dress he hadn't seen in years, dancing in what looked like a dimly lit bar, laughing, her hair flying. A side of her he hadn't witnessed in so long, a carefree abandon that he now knew she reserved for others. The sight burned, colder than any ice. That night, after Sarah left for what she called yoga with Brenda, David searched their bedroom. He checked under her mattress, behind her dresser drawers. His hand brushed against something small, metallic, tucked deep inside her nightstand drawer, beneath a pile of old scarves. A burner phone, a cheap pay-as-you-go device. His stomach dropped. This wasn't just a casual flirtation. This was a deeper, more calculated deception. He turned it on. The screen lit up, revealing a single contact. Mike. The text messages between Sarah and Mike confirmed his worst fears. Coordinating secret meetings, discussing times and places, hushed plans. His mind reeled. Mike wasn't a figment of a Tinder profile. Mike was real. The next morning, while Sarah was in the shower, David quietly downloaded a GPS tracking app onto her regular phone, linking it to his own. He watched the small icon, a blue dot, move through their suburban streets, heading towards her office. He needed to see it, to make the betrayal undeniably real, visible. He started following her, keeping his distance, using his old surveillance skills. 2 days later, during her lunch break, he watched her pull her car into the parking lot of a quiet coffee shop on the edge of town. He parked his own vehicle down the street, obscured by a delivery truck. Through the tinted window of his car, he saw him, a man, late 30s, average build, dark hair. Mike. He watched Sarah walk towards him, a bright smile on her face he hadn't seen directed at him in months. They sat at a table by the window. He saw them talking, laughing. Then their hands met across the table, fingers intertwining. Mike leaned in, whispered something, and Sarah giggled, squeezing his hand. David raised his phone, steadying his hands, and took a series of photographs. Each click of the shutter was a hammer blow, driving a nail into the coffin of their marriage. The proof, undeniable and concrete, was now captured, digital timestamps affirming the truth. Later that evening, Sarah announced she had a work conference the following week, out of town for 2 nights. "It's a big one," she'd said, trying to sound excited. "Really good for networking." David nodded, feigning interest. As soon as she left the room, he checked her work calendar online. No such conference existed. Another calculated lie. Another piece fell into place. Scott called later that day. Paul suggested a drink next Tuesday, the bar at the Grand Central Hotel. It's quiet, discreet, good for a first meeting. David remembered the Grand Central. It had a discreet mezzanine level, perfect for observation. "Good," he said, his voice cold. "Tell Paul to make the reservation." That weekend, while Sarah was out grocery shopping, David began setting up hidden cameras in their home. Small, almost imperceptible devices in the living room, the kitchen, the hallway. A painful, invasive step, but necessary. He needed documentation for everything, every conversation, every movement. He needed solid, irrefutable proof. For the divorce, for his peace of mind, for the final, definitive end. David continues to monitor Sarah's burner phone, discovering more texts with Mike. He learns Sarah has been telling Mike she's divorcing David soon. A brutal revelation. Scott reports that Sarah is eagerly anticipating her date with Paul, confirming the plan. David spends hours reviewing the security footage from his home, seeing Sarah's secret calls and hurried preparations. He notices small changes in her behavior, a new lightness, a guarded smile he now understands. The night of the planned rendezvous, David tells Sarah he has a late meeting, providing her an alibi. He drives to the hotel, parking discreetly, watching Sarah walk in, dressed in a new outfit. David positions himself to observe Sarah and Paul, Scott in disguise, at the bar. He watches Sarah laugh, flirt, and touch Scott's arm, the vivacious woman she once was with him. The sight of Sarah giving Scott her number, whispering, "Let's make this interesting," sears into David. Scott texts David from the bar, confirming Sarah's enthusiastic engagement. David returns home finding Sarah's "I'm home, honey" text, feeling a profound sickness. He continues to gather evidence, compiling a meticulous dossier of photos, texts, and dates. David begins to draft legal documents, preparing for the inevitable divorce proceedings. He feels an unexpected calm, a strange sense of clarity, born from the methodical execution of his plan. David continued his quiet surveillance, the burner phone in his possession revealing more layers of Sarah's deception. He read the text with Mike, the casual familiarity of their exchanges, the plans for future meetings. Then a message from Sarah to Mike that stopped him cold. "Almost there, love. Just a little more time, and I'll be free." David won't know what hit him. Divorce papers will be served soon. The words were a physical blow, a brutal revelation that she had already decided their fate and had been lying to him for months about it. It wasn't just an affair. It was a carefully plotted escape, a dismantling of their life without his knowledge. Scott called, his voice a low murmur. She's really looking forward to it, asking Paul about his favorite drink, what kind of food he likes, the whole 9 yards. She's totally bought in. The confirmation settled in David's gut like a stone. The plan was working. He spent hours reviewing the security footage from the hidden cameras in their home. He watched Sarah, unaware, living her double life. He saw her furtive calls on the burner phone, her hurried preparations for evenings out, the slight nervous energy as she checked her reflection. He noticed small changes he'd dismissed before, a new lightness in her step, a guarded smile that now made chilling sense, a glow in her eyes that wasn't for him. The subtle shifts in her demeanor, once interpreted as normal fluctuations, were now clear signals of a hidden life, a secret happiness found elsewhere. The night of the planned rendezvous arrived. "Got a late meeting tonight," David told Sarah, forcing his voice to sound casual. "Probably won't be home until after you're asleep." He watched her carefully, a brief flash of relief, quickly masked by a sympathetic nod. "Oh, that's a shame, honey. Don't work too hard." He provided her with the perfect alibi, setting the stage for her betrayal. He drove to the Grand Central Hotel, parking his car several blocks away in a dimly lit side street. He walked the rest of the way, the cool evening air doing little to calm the fire in his chest. He saw her almost immediately as he approached the hotel entrance. Sarah, dressed in a sleek black dress he'd never seen before, her hair styled differently, a nervous excitement radiating from her. She paused, checked her reflection in the glass doors, then pushed them open and stepped inside. David followed, keeping a discreet distance, and positioned himself on the mezzanine level overlooking the hotel bar. Scott, disguised as Paul Henderson, was already there, seated at a corner table, a drink in front of him. Sarah walked directly to him, a wide, confident smile spreading across her face. He watched them. Sarah laughed, a bright, unrestrained sound that echoed through the muted hum of the bar. She flirted openly, touching Scott's arm, leaning in close as he spoke. She was the vivacious, captivating woman he had fallen in love with, the woman he hadn't seen in years. It twisted his insides, a raw, aching pain. This was the Sarah who existed for others, the one he had lost, or perhaps never truly known. He saw the moment she reached into her purse, pulled out a small piece of paper. He saw her hand it to Scott, heard her whisper, "Let's make this interesting." It wasn't the number from her regular phone, it was the burner phone number. She was planning to use her secret line for her secret life. The finality of the act seared into David's mind. A moment later, his phone vibrated. A text from Scott. "She's fully engaged, gave me the burner number, asking about my travel schedule." David simply nodded, a tight, grim movement. He stayed for another 10 minutes, watching them, letting the scene imprint itself, then slipped out of the hotel. He drove home, the streets blurring, a profound sickness settling deep within him. As he walked through his front door, his phone buzzed again. A text from Sarah. "I'm home, honey. Hope your meeting went well. Love you." The casual lie after what he'd just witnessed felt like a poisoned dart. He spent the rest of the night at his desk, methodically compiling his dossier. Photos from the coffee shop, screenshots of Sarah's Tinder profile, the burner phone text, the timeline of her work conferences, and now the footage from his hidden cameras. Every piece of evidence was meticulously logged, dated, and categorized. He even began to draft the initial legal documents, outlining the terms for the inevitable divorce proceedings. There was an unexpected calm to it all, a strange sense of clarity born from the methodical execution of his plan. The pain was still there, a constant, dull ache, but it was now overshadowed by a cold, unwavering resolve. Sarah suggests a dinner date for her and David, trying to maintain a facade of normalcy. David, with a chilling resolve, agrees to a specific, upscale restaurant he knows she loves. He invites Scott and Brenda to join them, stating Brenda is a good friend of Sarah's. David sends Paul Henderson a message, arranging for him to be at the same restaurant. He carefully crafts the seating arrangement, ensuring Paul will be visible to Sarah. David tells Sarah he has a surprise for her, hinting at a reconciliation. He buys a new suit, preparing for the evening as if it were a tactical operation. David goes over the plan with Scott, ensuring every detail is perfectly timed. He looks at a photo of Sarah and him from their wedding day, a ghost of a smile on his face. David packs a small bag with the burner phone, photos, and legal papers ready for the confrontation. He grooms Rusty, giving him extra attention, the only innocent party in this mess. David calls his lawyer one last time, confirming the legal steps once the truth is out. Sarah, oblivious, is excited about the dinner, texting Brenda about David's romantic gesture. David feels a mix of dread and grim satisfaction as he ties his tie. Tonight she'll finally face it, he mutters to himself, the words cold and firm. A few days after her work conference, Sarah, with a forced cheerfulness David now recognized as part of her act, suggested a dinner date. "Just us," she'd said, "to reconnect. It feels like we haven't had a proper date night in ages." The words were an ironic twist of the knife, given what David now knew. "That sounds nice," David replied, his voice even. "How about the Elmwood? I know you like their scallops." He watched her carefully. Her eyes brightened. The Elmwood was an upscale place, one of her favorites, a spot they usually reserved for anniversaries or special occasions. It was also, he knew, a place with a clear line of sight from the main dining room to the bar area. "Perfect," she said, oblivious to the trap he was setting. "I'll make a reservation." "No, I've got it," David cut in smoothly. "And actually, I was thinking, I ran into Scott the other day and he mentioned he and Brenda were free. Why don't we make it a double date? Brenda's a good friend of yours, right?" Sarah hesitated for a fraction of a second, a fleeting shadow crossing her face before she plastered on a smile. "Oh, sure, that'd be fun. Brenda would love that." The momentary pause didn't escape David's notice. Brenda, David knew, was Sarah's confidant, the one who covered her girls' nights. This would put both of them on edge, unsure of what David knew or what he might say. As soon as he hung up, David sent a text to Scott. "The Elmwood, Friday at 7, table for 4, you and Brenda, and Paul needs to be at the bar by 7:15, visible from the dining area." He carefully crafted the seating arrangement in his mind. Sarah facing the bar, Brenda next to her, Scott opposite Brenda, and himself at the head of the table, with a clear view of everyone. Paul Henderson would be the final piece. He told Sarah he had a surprise for her, hinting at a reconciliation, playing into her probable expectation that he might be trying to win her back. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he'd said, making his voice sound contemplative, "and I want to make things right." He bought a new suit that afternoon, a dark gray, expertly tailored, preparing for the evening as if it were a tactical operation. Each detail, from the crispness of his shirt to the shine on his shoes, was meticulously considered. He went over the plan with Scott one last time, ensuring every movement, every look, every word would be perfectly timed. "Remember," David instructed, "Paul isn't looking for trouble. He's just there for a drink, maybe a business call, but he needs to be noticeable enough for Sarah to see him, to make the connection. He paused, looking at a framed photo on his desk. Sarah and him on their wedding day, her veil flowing, his arm around her waist, both beaming. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a phantom of what used to be. The raw pain of betrayal was still there, but it was now overlaid with a cold, clear purpose. Into a small duffel bag, David packed the burner phone, the printed photos of Sarah and Mike, the detailed timeline of her lies, and the initial legal papers. Everything he needed for the confrontation, for the inevitable fallout. He also made sure to give Rusty, their golden retriever, extra attention, grooming his thick fur, tossing his favorite squeaky toy. Rusty was the only innocent party in this mess, his loyal eyes a reminder of simple, uncomplicated love. He called his lawyer one last time, a brief, factual conversation, confirming the legal steps once the truth was finally out in the open. The lawyer's calm, professional tone offered a strange reassurance. Meanwhile, Sarah, oblivious, was buzzing with excitement. David saw her texting Brenda, heard her murmuring on the phone about David's romantic gesture, his sudden effort to fix things. It was another performance, another lie building on a foundation of deceit. As he tied his tie, the knot firm and precise, David felt a strange mix of dread and grim satisfaction. The dread was for the explosion that was coming, the unraveling of everything. The satisfaction was for the meticulously planned execution, the cold, hard justice he was about to deliver. Tonight, he muttered to himself, adjusting his collar, she'll finally face it. Life's costly choices eventually unfold one way or another. Stick around to the end to see how they unfold for Sarah and David. David, Sarah, Scott, and Brenda arrive at the upscale restaurant, taking their seats. Sarah beams, believing David is trying to rekindle their romance. David watches as Paul Henderson, Scott, disguised as Paul, walks in and takes a table near them. Sarah's eyes widen as she recognizes Paul, a flicker of panic crossing her face. She tries to avoid eye contact, her cheerful demeanor quickly dissolving. David observes her discomfort, a cruel satisfaction mixing with his pain. He subtly prompts Scott to accidentally bump into Paul on his way to the restroom. Scott initiates a brief, staged conversation with Paul, loud enough for Sarah to overhear. Sarah becomes increasingly agitated, excusing herself to the restroom, texting frantically on her burner phone. David excuses himself, following her, confronting her just outside the restroom. "Who were you just texting, Sarah?" he asks, holding up the burner phone he found. He shows her the photos of her and Mike, the Tinder profile, Paul's messages. Sarah's face pales, denying everything at first, then collapsing into sobs. "I know everything," David states, his voice devoid of emotion. And so does Paul Henderson. He leads her back to the table, her confession already hanging heavy in the air. The hostess led them to their reserved table, a quiet corner booth with a clear view of the bustling bar area. David held the chair for Sarah, who settled in with a bright, expectant smile. She radiated a renewed hope, believing this was the start of a new chapter, a rekindling of their romance. Brenda offered a slightly nervous smile while Scott, calm and steady, met David's gaze across the table. They ordered drinks, small talk flowing like a thin, unconvincing veneer over the tension David could feel humming beneath the surface. Then, he saw him. Paul Henderson, an actor Scott had hired, walked in impeccably dressed in a dark suit, carrying a sleek leather briefcase. He scanned the room, then settled at a small, discreet table near the bar, directly in Sarah's line of sight. David watched Sarah's reaction. Her eyes, which had been sparkling moments ago, widened almost imperceptibly. A flicker of something, quick as a shadow, crossed her face. Recognition, then panic. Her cheerful demeanor, carefully constructed for the evening, began to dissolve. She picked up her wine glass, taking a long sip, her gaze darting away from Paul, pretending not to notice him. David felt a cruel satisfaction mixed with the deep, cold ache in his chest. He waited a few more minutes, letting the discomfort simmer. Then he caught Scott's eye and subtly nodded towards the restroom. Scott, understanding, cleared his throat. "Excuse me for a moment," he said, pushing back his chair. As he walked past Paul's table on his way to the men's room, he accidentally brushed against Paul's shoulder. "Oh, excuse me, mate," Scott said, his voice just loud enough for their table to hear. Didn't see you there. Paul looked up, a friendly, professional smile on his face. No worries at all. Scott, isn't it? Good to see you again. Paul Henderson. He extended a hand. Scott shook it, maintaining the illusion. Everything going well with the firm? Paul asked, keeping the conversation brief, just long enough. Sarah's agitation was palpable. Her grip on her wine glass tightened, her knuckles white. She looked down at her plate, pushing food around with her fork, no longer pretending to enjoy the evening. She pulled her phone from her purse, her fingers flying across the screen, texting frantically. She glanced nervously towards Paul, then back at the table. I just need a moment, Sarah murmured, her voice strained. She pushed back her chair, almost overturning it, and practically fled towards the ladies' room. David waited exactly 30 seconds, then quietly excused himself. I'll just check on her. He walked calmly through the dining room, past the now attentive Paul, and found Sarah just outside the restroom, her back to him, still furiously texting on her burner phone. Who were you just texting, Sarah? David asked, his voice low, devoid of any warmth. He held up the burner phone he'd taken from his duffel bag, the one he'd found in her nightstand. She spun around, her eyes wide with fear, the phone in her hand clattering to the tiled floor. Her face drained of color, going utterly pale. David didn't wait for her to speak. He pulled out the neatly arranged stack of evidence from his inner jacket pocket. He held up the printed screenshots of her Tinder profile. The "my husband doesn't know about this" clear as day. Then the photos of her and Mike, their hands clasped across the coffee shop table. Finally, the messages between her and Paul, outlining her desire for excitement and discretion. Sarah stared at the evidence, her mouth opening and closing, no sound coming out. David, she stammered, then tried to deny it. I don't know what this is. It's not what you think. But the words were weak, crumbling under the weight of the evidence. Her denial dissolved into a choked sob, her body slumping against the wall. Tears streamed down her face, but David felt nothing but a cold, hard emptiness. I know everything, Sarah, David stated, his voice flat, emotionless. Everything. And so does Paul Henderson. He gestured subtly back towards the dining room. The implication hung heavy in the air. Her secret lover, the discreet corporate lawyer, was a witness to her exposure. He picked up the burner phone from the floor, pocketing it. Then, taking her arm, a firm, non-negotiable grip, he began to lead her back towards their table, towards Scott and Brenda, towards the public unraveling of her carefully constructed lies. Her confession, unspoken but undeniable, was already hanging heavy in the air, a thick pall over the elegant restaurant. Sarah attempts a tearful apology, blaming David for her boredom, attempting to shift blame. David cuts her off, presenting the compiled evidence, showing the depth and duration of her betrayal. Brenda, shocked, confronts Sarah, feeling used and lied to, ending their friendship. David lays out the divorce papers on the table, stating he wants an uncontested separation. Sarah tries to bargain, to save face, offering to fix things, but David remains unmoved. He tells her he wants the house sold, assets divided, and no further contact outside of legal matters. Sarah, cornered, becomes enraged, accusing David of being cold and unfeeling. David recalls his military training, maintaining his composure, focused on the mission. They leave the restaurant, Sarah's reputation in tatters, David feeling empty but resolute. The next days are a blur of lawyers, financial agreements, and emotional upheaval. Sarah moves out, taking only her personal belongings, leaving behind a hollow home. David watches the house sell, the for sale sign replaced by sold, severing the last tie. He finds solace in Rusty's unconditional loyalty, a stark contrast to human betrayal. Scott checks in regularly, offering support, reminding David of true friendship. David closes the chapter, knowing the hard harvest of truth, though painful, was necessary. David led Sarah back to the table. Her face was blotchy, tears streaming, her composure completely shattered. Brenda stared wide-eyed from Sarah to David, then to Scott, who gave a slight, somber nod. Paul Henderson, seeing the drama unfold, discreetly paid his tab and slipped out of the restaurant. Sarah tried to speak, a choked apology forming on her lips. David, I'm so sorry, she began, her voice hoarse. I was so bored. You were never around, always working. She attempted to shift the blame, twisting the narrative. David cut her off, his voice calm, firm. He reached into his duffel bag and pulled out the thick, meticulously compiled dossier. He spread the evidence across the elegant tablecloth. The Tinder profile, the photos of her and Mike, the burner phone text, the fake conference schedules, the detailed timeline of her lies. Each document a cold, hard fact, showing the depth and duration of her betrayal. This wasn't about boredom, Sarah, he said. This was a calculated deception for months. Brenda, until now silent, gasped. Sarah, you told me you were with me all those times. You lied to me? Her voice was laced with disbelief, then hurt. I covered for you. I thought we were friends. She looked at Sarah with an expression of profound disappointment. I can't believe this. It was the end of a friendship, plain as day. David pushed a stack of papers across the table. These are the initial divorce papers, he stated, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. I want an uncontested separation. No fuss. You sign them and we move on. Sarah stared at the documents, then at David, her face a mask of panic. No, David, please, she pleaded, reaching for his hand, which he calmly withdrew. We can fix this. I can change. We can go to counseling. We can make it work. She tried to bargain, to save face, to pull him back into the familiar dance of their marriage. It's too late for that, David said, his gaze unwavering. I want the house sold, assets divided, fairly, according to the law, and no further contact outside of legal matters. Ever. Cornered, stripped bare, Sarah's pleas dissolved into rage. Her face contorted, tears still flowing, but now mixed with fury. You cold, unfeeling bastard! She hissed, her voice barely a whisper, but sharp with venom. You planned all this, didn't you? You set me up. This is just like you, so clinical, so detached. David felt the sting of her words, but his military training kicked in, a practiced detachment taking over. He maintained his composure, his focus fixed on the mission, the clean, decisive end of their marriage. Her accusations were just noise, distractions from the objective. They left the restaurant shortly after, the remnants of their dinner untouched. Sarah walked out first, her shoulders slumped, her reputation in tatters. David followed, a profound emptiness in his chest, but also a strange, quiet sense of resolution. The truth was out, the hard part was over. The next days and weeks blurred into a grim landscape of lawyers' offices, financial agreements, and emotional upheaval. Sarah, defeated, agreed to the terms. She moved out, taking only her personal belongings, clothes, a few buys of sentimental items, leaving behind a hollow home filled with ghosts. David watched as the for sale sign went up in their front yard, then, a few months later, was replaced by a sold sign. The last physical tie to their shared life was severed. In the quiet evenings, David found solace in Rusty's unconditional loyalty. The dog would rest his head on David's lap, his warm presence a stark contrast to the human betrayal David had endured. Scott checked in regularly, a steady presence offering support, reminding David of true friendship. David closed the chapter, knowing the hard harvest of truth, though painful, was necessary. It had cost him dearly, but he had faced it, peeled back the layers of deceit, and taken control. Months pass, the raw wound of betrayal slowly begins to scab over. David finds himself alone in the new, smaller apartment, grappling with the quiet. He starts jogging again, finding therapy in the rhythm of his feet hitting the pavement. He visits his parents' old farm, walking the fields, remembering simpler times. David reconnects with old friends, finding comfort in shared stories and laughter. He starts volunteering at a local animal shelter, dedicating time to creatures in need. A new sense of purpose emerges from the ashes of his shattered marriage. He reads Sarah's final letter, full of regret but no real apology, and finally deletes it. David reflects on the moral price paid, not just by Sarah, but by the naive man he once was. He acknowledges the pain, but also the strength he found in confronting the truth. The sting of betrayal still lingers, but it no longer dictates his every breath. David starts exploring new interests, taking a pottery class, trying new restaurants. He learns to trust his instincts again, but with a newfound caution and wisdom. He sits on a small porch, Rusty by his side, watching the Midwestern sunset, A quiet peace settles over him, a sense that while life isn't perfect, it's his own to build, honestly and truly. Months passed, marked by the changing seasons, the sharp edge of the raw wound of betrayal slowly beginning to dull, to scab over. David found himself in a smaller, quieter apartment on the edge of town, the familiar suburban sounds replaced by the hum of the city a few blocks away. The silence in the evenings was vast, a cavernous space where laughter once echoed, where two lives had once intertwined. He grappled with it, the quiet. Sometimes it felt like peace, other times a heavy absence. He started jogging again, pushing himself through the crisp morning air, the rhythmic thump of his feet on the pavement, a steadying therapy. Each mile was a small victory, a reclaiming of his body, a cleansing of the stagnant emotions. On weekends, he would drive out to his parents' old farm, long since sold, but the fields were still there. He walked the dusty rows, remembering the simpler times, the days when life felt less complicated, when trust was an assumed given. He reconnected with old friends, the ones he'd drifted from over the years, finding comfort in shared stories and easy laughter. There was a directness in their conversations, a solid ground that felt real, untainted by the intricate lies he'd recently navigated. He started volunteering at a local animal shelter, dedicating his time to creatures in need, their honest, uncomplicated affection a balm to his bruised spirit. There, amidst the barks and purrs, a new sense of purpose began to emerge, slowly, steadily, from the ashes of his shattered marriage. It wasn't a grand, sweeping purpose, but a quiet, foundational one. One afternoon, a letter arrived, Sarah's handwriting on the envelope. He opened it carefully. It was full of regret, of justifications, of promises of change if only he would reconsider. But there was no real apology, no genuine acknowledgement of the pain she had inflicted, only a desperate attempt to salvage her own image. He read it once, then again, feeling nothing but a detached clarity. He walked to his laptop, opened his email, and finally, deliberately, deleted her contact. He sat for a long time afterward, reflecting not just on Sarah's choices, but on his own. The moral price paid, not just by her, by the man Mike probably was, but by the naive man he himself had been. The man who had been so trusting, so comfortable in his assumptions, that he'd missed every sign. He acknowledged the pain, sharp and deep, but also the unexpected strength he had found in confronting the truth, in meticulously dissecting the lie. The sting of betrayal still lingered, a faint phantom ache, but it no longer dictated his every breath, his every thought. It was a scar, a memory, not an open wound. He began exploring new interests, taking a pottery class, the feel of the clay grounding, tangible. He tried new restaurants, tasted new flavors, opening himself to experiences beyond the familiar. He learned to trust his instincts again, not with the blind faith of before, but with a newfound caution, a hard-won wisdom that would guide him forward. He sat on his small porch in the evening, Rusty curled contentedly by his side, watching the Midwestern sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. A quiet peace, not jubilant, but profound, settled over him. Life wasn't perfect, wouldn't ever be, but it was his own now to build, honestly and truly, on solid ground.